All right, welcome to this lesson on wilderness meal planning. It's a pretty important part of uh, canoe tripping or any wilderness trip for that matter, because eating is a really important part of what we do. In fact, I would say it's really one of the more social components of what you do, and a lot of fun happens in it. There's an expression, what you eat in the bush always tastes better, or it's always better in the bush. And that's because it really is. I mean, you work hard, you do a lot, and then you get a chance to eat, and then things are really tasty. It just seems to always taste better there. I've eaten some wilderness meals at home and thought they weren't very good, but when I was out in the wilderness, they always seem to taste better. So some special considerations. There's some things that you have to take into consideration when you're planning for meals, and preservation is probably the single most important thing. We just simply don't have things like refrigerators. We don't have the ability to bring in things that will last and stay for a very long time. We kind of take it for granted that we have these wonderful things called refrigerators, but they're really actually a relatively new invention, and freezing food is not really an option beyond the first day. So we have to look at other ways to preserve our food. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. The other thing is that because we're carrying everything we bring with us, weight matters. And so, things that are really heavy don't really they don't lend themselves to coming on a trip as well as things that are very light. And so water tends to be the biggest weight in food. And so anytime we can remove the water from food, we'll do that. Okay. And weight just matters. And the other thing is size. I think items that are really big and bulky and kind of, are challenging to carry, or maybe they break or whatever, just don't do so well. So a good example is potato chips are just something I almost never bring unless I'm bringing Pringles or maybe Crispers, or sometimes we'll bring popcorn that we can pop out in the bush. Those kind of things make more sense than to bring big bags of Doritos or uh, Lay's potato chips. So we don't bring bulky things because they just take up too much space. Bread is another good example of something that can be, depending on the type of bread, a loaf of white bread can easily get crushed and damaged, and so it takes up a lot of space. It doesn't, have as much calories, so we'll just use bagels, or we'll use compressed buns, flat buns, naan breads. Those kind of things will work better. All right. So those are three things that you always have to keep in mind: preservation, weight, and size. We just can't get away from it. Now, on the first day, I often bring something frozen, usually pre-cooked meat. Okay, so I will pre-cook my meat and I'll bring it along. This, in fact, is our standard on our trip: pre-cooked meats, frozen, and eaten the first day, right? It works really well. We usually bring a rice or a pasta or something to go with it, even a salad, because we can get away with salads on the first day. They're not going to go bad in one day if we kind of keep them in a reasonably safe place. And sometimes I even bring these things like in separate paper bags or plastic bags that I can dispose of once I'm out there, so that I don't even have to carry the containers that they're in. So the first day is always a special day, a special meal out, and I often really enjoy that first night out: steak and baked potato and all kinds of different things that you can bring along to make it a really good meal. Now, after the first day, though, we really have to start thinking about how are we going to preserve our foods, okay? And probably my favorite by far is dehydration. And the simple thing is that we can remove, sometimes 75% of water is removed roughly, right? About 75% of the weight is lost. So what happens is when you dehydrate it, you're basically kind of, I don't want to say cooking, because you're not really cooking it. You're heating it at a very low temperature. I'm going to say it's usually around 142 degrees. I believe that's Fahrenheit, so that's below boiling point. You're not boiling or cooking the food, okay? And so that's Fahrenheit, not Celsius. Very low. You can do this in your oven if your oven has the ability to heat up to that temperature. Many people's ovens don't. Like my oven, the lowest it'll go is 175. So you can do it at 175, but it's a little bit on the warm side to be dehydrating things. So you and I demonstrated this in class. We used a dehydrator. You put it in, and literally overnight, the food dehydrates and it just removes it and just becomes all dry and crumbly and whatnot. And there's a video on me rehydrating food, and so you can see how we actually rehydrate the food and then we can eat it. It's pretty good. Beef jerky is a good example of something that is beef that is dehydrated. It's usually thin, fairly thin strips. They often soak the beef in a pre sauce of stuff that includes like vinegars and various other things to kind of soften up the meat a little bit, and then they put it into the dehydrator and let it go. And this is a practice that's been used for thousands of years. The natives basically created beef jerky by dehydrating it over a fire, smoking it, and not letting it get too hot. They did this with salmon. They did it with lots of different things. So you can smoke salmon is another example of that, right? So you can preserve your food this way, and it'll keep for weeks and weeks, months if you want to. Okay. Now, another thing that we like to take into consideration is that we want to make healthy foods. We don't want to have meals that are just, all full of pasta or all full of the same things over and over again. And, there is this thing called the Canada Food Guide. I'm going to show you the Canada Food Guide diagram down here. I'll even maybe blow it up a little bit. There we go. See if I can get that to come down. There we go there. So there are basically different parts of this. This is your fruits and vegetables section. They're recommending that half your meals are fruits and vegetables. Realistically, that is possible to do that. Many of these things are very dehydratable. Vegetables and fruits dehydrate really well, and you can eat them, and they actually are quite tasty. And so there's no reason that we can't do that. We tend to look for our calories more, though, from this section here, which is our pastas and our it's in our grain section. So we tend to have a fair bit of bread and rice and those kind of things that provide a fair bit of starch, which gives us lots of calories. And when we're in the bush, we do have to take into consideration calories. So we'll be talking about that in a minute. And then, of course, we have our protein section, and here we have your meat and your eggs, your nuts. Nuts are a tremendously excellent source of protein, so I'm eating that all the time. And so this here, tofu, is our non, another vegetarian version of protein as well. I like to get a lot of mine from nuts. Even on a daily basis now, and I love eggs, and I try to limit my meat a little bit and not overeat it, but I do eat meat and I do quite enjoy it. So that's the Canada Food Guide. You can kind of use this as a background, like if you're making a meal, that you're getting something from each of these categories, that you're not just eating all from one category. So if you're having craft dinner, you're completely avoiding this particular food group. And now I don't mind having a bit of craft dinner on a trip. It's light, it's easy, it's great to bring along. But the other thing is it just doesn't have much for nutritional value. So having it as a sort of a backup, so throwing a couple of boxes of craft dinner in for the guys who are really hungry, didn't get enough of the other things, is just a great way to do it. But I don't generally make craft dinner my meal. It's just a backup plan. Okay. Now, a couple other things here as we go through is calories. Okay. When we're in the bush, the average person, it depends on your weight, but let's just say you need at least 2,000 calories minimum. Now, most of the guys are going to want to go, no way, I'm not going to survive on 2,000 calories, because if I was to show you that, they'd forget it. I'm pretty sure some of the bigger gentlemen in our class are going to want 3,000 calories, right? And the smaller individuals in our class might be able to get away with 2,000. Then you add in activity, and it's not unrealistic realistic to expect that your calories go way up. Uh, After riding a 4 hour or 5 hour bike race, a rider can actually burn 4 or 5 thousand calories. So it's reasonable to expect that we're going to have to up our calorie content per person to, 4,000 calories per person if we're really, really busy throughout the day, because we have our base load calories plus what we're going to use for exercise. And so it's not reasonable to say, oh, we're going to pack for 2,500 calories because that's the average amount that we need. We really need to consider a little bit more. And I've been really good at finding ways to um, or we've been really well at having enough food. There's a balance between having too much because you're carrying that food with you all the time and you don't want to do that. But we generally have lots of snacks available. So there's granola bars, which are fairly light, and sometimes fruit bars, and those things can be consumed when people are hungry and they really need to. The other really good one here is nuts. Nuts provide a tremendous amount of calories and a lot of protein and fill you up quite nicely, and that's just a wonderful thing. They call it gorp. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but gorp is good old raisins and peanuts, so it's something worth having on every trip. Now, when we get into our meal preparations, there are kind of three components that will happen here, and that those three components consist of your home preparations, uh, and what you're going to do at home. So you're going to cook this meal at home and prepare things at home as much as possible. Okay, and you get the more the better. I would say here, the more the better. I don't want to have to do anything in the bush if I don't have to. It'd be awesome just to open it up and eat it, but reality is I'm going to have to do some preparation, some camping in the bush, or cooking, sorry, in the bush. Obviously camping, but if some preparation of the meal in the woods, but I want to try to keep that to a minimum. Use the facilities I have at home to do that, okay? When it comes to packing, there's a couple things here that you need to know. One is we repack everything. I don't know if there's really much, maybe the odd uh, bread that we don't, but I almost repack everything, and we use a lot of Ziploc baggies. And we do this because Ziploc baggies are resealable. I can open and close them. I can put things back and store them again for, later, for eating later on. And I don't have to worry about them just in that moment or eat the entire package. We want to be able to restore things. So cookies, for example, they get pulled out of their bag and put into Ziploc baggies. Even a craft dinner box, I take it out of the box and I put it into a Ziploc baggie. It's amazing. I can actually get 2 bags or 2 boxes of craft dinner into a medium-sized Ziploc baggie, just a medium size, with the sauce or the cheese mix in there, and no problem. And it takes up about the same space as one box. And so that conserves space. It reduces the amount of waste that I have to bring into the woods with me. So we don't generally bring the boxes even with us, okay? Everything gets repacked. Once we've got it ready to pack up, we're going to pack it into a pail that looks like this, okay? And on the side of the pail, right on the side of this pail right here, will be a label that shows us what is in here. And we will pack meals, one on the bottom, maybe one in the middle, and sometimes even one on the top. Some meals are bigger, and I can only get 2 meals, or we can only get 2 meals into a pail. And I'll separate them with a piece of cardboard, usually like a cutout from a pizza box, a little heavier corrugated cardboard. I do that so that it's really clear which meal is where, and I can use that cardboard to write instructions for preparation of any of the meals that we're using. It's light, it's simple, and if I need to, I could actually use it as a helpful fire starter. Cardboard tends to burn very well, so it serves a multitude of purposes, okay? The meals that will be eaten later in the trip generally go to the bottom, but not always. Sometimes I will put a meal the other way if it is heavier. If I have a really heavy meal, I want to get rid of it, or I want it down at the bottom of the pail so that it's not crushing the meal on the top. And that makes for a bit of a nuisance because I will have to remove the contents of one meal, take out the contents of another meal, and then replace it. But it's worth it to do that. I don't do it very often, but it does sometimes occur. Okay. These pails have a nice seal on them. You rotate. You saw that in the camp kitchen, the kitchen pail and the water pail. Use the same pails for these things, and they have a nice handle, and they're quite easily carried. When we do our portaging lesson, you'll see how we carry them and how people carry them in the woods. They can get pretty heavy when you start putting food in, and that's another consideration, is that you want to balance the weight between your pails. You don't want one pail ridiculously heavy and another one really light. So you're not going to fill one with really heavy contents and another one with really, really light contents. Okay. So you're going to balance those out. But that's how we pack things, and we take them. A group of 8 people, it's not unusual for them to have 4 or 5 pails full of food, snacks, meals, all kinds of different things that come along on the trip. And it's really, it's a great way for us to carry the food. They also provide really essential water and animal proofness. So if they're sealed properly, which we do have to make sure that we screw the lid on correctly, animals for the most part cannot get in them. A raccoon cannot get in this. Squirrels and chipmunks cannot get in it. And that's probably a bigger concern for me than bears. I mean, everybody talks about bears because, of course, they're very scary. The truth of the matter is, if a bear is going to get a hold of your pail and wants to get in it, then I'm going to probably let him have it, and I'm going to get the heck out of there and look after myself and not worry so much about my food. I'll figure out another way to survive for a few days until I get out of the bush. And probably the last thing is that because they seal fairly well, they seal in odors, and odors are a thing that attracts animals, and we want to keep those odors from spreading to attract animals to our camp. So it's really important that every night we seal up our pails. We don't leave things open. Animals will get in them. I guarantee you there's chipmunks, raccoons, and various other animals that you will find around the parks. Okay. Camp preparations. When we get to camp, we must use only the equipment we have, right? You can't just say, I'm going to, do something or cook something with tools that we might have at home, but we would not have at camp. So we have to keep in mind that basically we have stoves. We do have an open flame that we can, use a stick or our grills over top of. We do that quite a bit, actually. It's kind of fun cooking over the fire. And those kind of camp preparations, right? Now I'm going to do one last little section here, and I'm going to talk about each of the different meals that we do. So we do breakfast, and breakfast, a couple things we want to try to do with breakfast is we usually like them to be quick. Quick and easy is really what people like. And so probably a lot of people's favorites is some sort of an oatmeal. We do sometimes have a brunch meal, and when we do a brunch, we seriously consider doing something more than a little longer. So things like pancakes and other things, even eggs, boiled eggs are sometimes brought along, or I always bring boiled eggs actually on my trips. I love them. Easy. Their preparation is at home, and I'm good to go. There is some cooking here. So some cooking is involved in my breakfast, okay? And then we have what's, lunch, and quite often we're on the move, okay? So I'm going to say here, no cooking lunch. And the reason is I don't want to have to stop somewhere, pull out all my kitchen and do a big cook along the side of a trail, or find a place to even do this. It's very inconvenient. I like my lunches to be no cooking. And so a lot of times we bring along some kind of cheeses that will keep for a number of days, bries and various other hard cheeses that will not go bad. Crackers, different types of breads, just things as simple as peanut butter and jam will keep a fair fair time in the woods and make for pretty yummy lunches. Nuts again come in really handy here, but what I don't want to do is I don't want to have to get out my stove and cook up a big meal. It just isn't practical. And then when we get to supper or dinner, I'll say, whatever you want to call it here, uh, this is where we will uh, the most cooking and the most cooking and fire always, right? We want to fire. Um, we're going to make a great meal at this time. We're going to take our time. Uh, we have the time to do it. Sometimes I might, plan my meals based on, the activities for the day. So if I have a really hard day of paddling, that's maybe a really good day to eat a dehydrated food because it's fairly easy to prepare and I don't have to do a lot of work. Whereas if I'm have an easier day and I'm not traveling as much or maybe not even at all, that's a day I might choose to cook a more complicated meal. Okay, so it really depends on what I'm doing, but by far this is going to be the meal that I invest the most time and energy into. And generally speaking, sitting around, eating this meal is a lot of fun at camp, and there's lots of stories, lots of different things that are happening, and everybody's involved. Somebody's on fire, somebody's on water, somebody's cooking, somebody's doing cleanup. There's different jobs and tasks for everybody because you're not cooking for one or two people on our camping trips. You're cooking for as many as 12, sometimes 10 or 12 people, and that's a lot of people to prepare a meal for, even if you're at home in a kitchen, let alone when you're working out of a canoe kitchen in the wilderness. So that's there. And then the last thing we have is snacks, right? So what do we do for a snack? And usually it's something simple um, and but uh, tasty, but some are cooked. I've seen people bake cakes in the bush using the open fire, and I've seen people. I've got There's a wonderful treat if you like it. I'm not a real huge fan of it, but bannock can be made. So there's different things that you can do for snacks in the bush. Obviously, chips and um, those kind of things are one of the most popular snacks because they're just something you can open up and pass around. So crispers go over really well. Even a cookie or a granola bar can be a nice snack, evening snack. And I really think that they're important. Obviously, as teenagers, you probably all snack at some point. All right, so this is your lesson on wilderness camping. There's a really good PowerPoint presentation on a one-day set of meals that was put together by Joanne Page. I want you to watch that. It's excellent. She has shown 3 amazing wilderness meals, and I think you need to do your time watching and reading through that PowerPoint presentation as well. All right, hope you enjoyed this, and we'll see you again.